are going to be talking about Return of the Living Dead Part 2, written and directed by Ken Wiederhorn. This is a 1988 movie, and out of the original 3 Return of the Living Dead films, I feel this one gets the least amount of love, so I thought we'd talk about it, because no one ever really talks about this movie. They talk about the first or the third one, kind of ignore the kind of the later ones, and 2 gets kind of forgotten about as well. Now, the story here has actually got a bit of a troubled kind of backstory in regards to production. Apparently the director wasn't really wanting to do this film. He didn't want to do any more horror films, and this was kind of meant to be his last horror film, but he only ever got work as scripts for kind of like horror films after this, and a lot of the actors don't like the movie as well. But is it that bad? So the story is a kind of a loose follow-on from the original movie, and interestingly enough, this film wasn't originally conceived as part of the Return of the Living Dead franchise. It was written as I think initially as a sequel to the Living Dead, the official Living Dead franchise, and then as a kind of a standalone, but it only ever got financing if it was tied into the Return of the Living Dead series of films. So it had to be kind of slightly reworked, obviously, for that. The story is very similar to the first one, to be honest. There is, in this series, essentially we have this chemical that when kind of like put on a dead body, it kind of awakens and turns into a zombie. A barrel of this is dropped off by the military and goes into a kind of a sewer system and affects this kind of like this local kind of graveyard, along with a couple of kids as well. And then it's really a story of these kind of group of survivors. We have a couple of familiar faces from the first movie, although they are playing different, albeit very similar characters, and some new characters kind of banding together to try and kind of fight off this horde of the undead. This movie is played for more comedy than the first one, and then even the first one was somewhat satirical, but this one is more kind of goofy humour. It also feels, although there are some gory shots here, it feels a lot more family friendly. If you can say that about a zombie film, it just never feels like it has any teeth really, or any edge to it. This movie, it all seems quite sanitized, and apparently apart from one scene, it nearly didn't get an R rating in America. There was a scene in the hospital involving a guy that gets cut in half, but other than that, if it wasn't for that scene, apparently it wouldn't have got an R rating. So it's somewhat of a kind of a muted movie, and the story as well, like, it's so similar to the first one, it becomes a little bit forgettable and really doesn't have anything to make it stand out. I mean, the first movie was this kind of like fun, kind of like punk rock, kind of grungy feel to it. The third one took a different kind of tone. It really focused on a zombie and was a Romeo and Juliet style movie. And the second one, it's just more generic. That's not to say it's not enjoyable. It still has an element of fun, and it has a relatively kind of high production value here. And there's some great looking animatronics. I think where this series definitely shines is the way that the zombies are. They're not zombies that you get shot in the head and they die. These ones, you can chop them up and each little part would still be alive. So it makes, even when these parts of these zombies are kind of like, in pieces, each one of them each bit is still alive. So it makes some good animatronics. The zombie makeup itself, I've got to say, they seem to not want to put any kind of like contacts in these. They all have like just normal human eyes, which, I don't know, it's just something about it. It just doesn't, it looks like people in Thriller makeup, basically. Ironically, there's actually a kind of a Michael Jackson Thriller joke in this film as well. The characters themselves are, somewhat kind of cliche and forgettable. There are some fun performances, and it kind of the focus is on this young boy, so it almost feels like a kind of a kids movie, because our main character is kind of like this 12-year-old kid, although he does kind of get some support from, like, I think Dana Ashbrook is in it, and one of the girls from Weird Science, who I had a total crush on in the 80s, Snyder, I forget her first name, but it does have a fun feel. It all seems obviously quite sort of small in scale. There's never really a kind of a zombie apocalypse as such. And they find a cure, not cure exactly, but with this movie, they do actually find a way to stop the zombies, which is kind of like, in this series, generally they're pretty much unstoppable, this one, there's a little bit of a departure from it. But it just feels very muted, very neutered. So it's a kind of a beginner's zombie film, I would say. And I can understand why this film gets kind of looked over, because I feel the first and the third movies are very, very strong, and this one's kind of stuck in the middle. And while it's not bad, it just kind of pales in comparison to the other two. And obviously we won't sort of speak too much about the kind of like 4 and 5, which came out a lot later. But as it stands at the moment, I've got to say it's a fun film, but it really is forgettable, to be honest. And I can understand why this film gets shunned, but I think if you were to watch it apart from the Return of the Dead series, and you can kind of maybe get away from it, it's still maybe worth a watch if you are a zombie fan, especially if you don't like kind of the super serious ones, and you can kind of like a bit more of a horror comedy. We had a lot of these kind of in the 80s, the kind of it's a bit more gory than Ghostbusters, but that kind of like sort of goofy humour, Monster Squads, that kind of stuff. So I'll give it a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I shall look forward to you next time. Bye for now.